The first time I heard the wet, dragging footsteps, I convinced myself it was the old pipes in Grandpa Vern's apartment building. But pipes don't leave glistening puddles that shine in the hallway's dim light. And they certainly don't form perfect footprints that lead directly to your bedroom door. I inherited the apartment 3 weeks ago. It's a cramped space in an aging building by the harbor, filled with maritime memorabilia from my grandfather's 40 years at sea. Weathered maps, ships in bottles, a rusted sextant, tangible fragments of his life that now belong to me, a man who'd never ventured beyond the coastline. At first, organizing his belongings had been a strange comfort. Each object told a story, showed me parts of him I'd never known. Then came the letters. They were hidden in the back of his desk drawer, bundled together with twine that had gone brittle with age. 7 envelopes, each addressed to my grandfather, from someone named Thomas Blackwood. The paper had that distinctive yellow tinge of age, edges curled and soft. The handwriting was erratic, jagged, as if written on a surface that wouldn't stay still. I read the first letter that afternoon as rain lashed against the windows. Blackwood and my grandfather had served together on the Valiant Tide in the 60s. The letter hinted at something they'd experienced at sea, something that had bound them together through the decades. The language was vague, but the undertone of fear was unmistakable. We swore never to speak of what happened that night in the North Atlantic, but it follows me, Verna. I feel its presence even now, watching me from the shadows of my home. It hasn't forgotten our bargain. My skin prickled as I read those words. A damp chill seemed to seep through the walls of the apartment, and I found myself pulling my sweater tighter around my shoulders. According to the final letter, dated 15 years ago, Blackwood had passed away. His last words to my grandfather were a warning. When I'm gone, it may seek you out instead. Burn these letters. Break our connection before it's too late. My grandfather had clearly ignored that advice, and now the letters were mine. That night, I dreamed of drowning. Cold water rushed into my lungs as something dragged me down into the black depths. I woke gasping, sheets damp with sweat, the taste of salt strong in my mouth. The sound came at 3:14 a.m. I know because I checked my phone when I first heard it. A heavy, wet slap against the hardwood floors outside my bedroom. Then another, and another. The unmistakable rhythm of footsteps, but wrong somehow, as if made by feet, too heavy and too wide. My heart hammered against my ribs as I lay frozen in bed. The footsteps paused outside my door. I could see the shadow of something massive blocking the thin strip of light beneath the doorway. Water began to seep under the door, black and viscous. Nothing like normal water. It smelled of rot and salt, and things that decompose on the ocean floor. The doorknob rattled. My lungs seized, unable to draw breath. Then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The shadow receded. The footsteps moved away, back toward the small study where I'd left the letters. It took an hour before I found the courage to leave my bed. When I did, trembling hands fumbling for the light switch, I found a trail of wet footprints leading from the front door to my bedroom and finally to the study. Each print was at least twice the size of my own foot, with strange proportions. Too wide, with elongated toes that ended in points rather than the round shapes of human digits. The trail ended at the desk drawer where I'd returned the letters. The drawer was now partially open, water dripping from its edges. Inside, the letters were soaked through, but not with water. The liquid was thicker, darker, with the same putrid scent that had seeped under my door. I called my uncle the next morning, my voice cracking as I asked about Blackwood. My uncle went quiet for a long time, before telling me that Blackwood and my grandfather had been the only survivors of a shipwreck in 1967. They'd been adrift for 9 days before rescue. My grandfather never spoke about what happened during those days, but he'd never set foot on a boat again. That night, I gathered the letters and placed them in a metal trash can on the balcony. As I struck the match, the air around me suddenly grew dense, heavy with moisture. I felt watched by something just beyond my peripheral vision. My hands shook violently as I dropped the match onto the letters. They wouldn't burn. The match sizzled out against the damp paper. I tried again and again, but each match died with a hiss against the mysterious dark liquid that seemed to be seeping from the very fibers of the paper. I now sleep on the couch, far from the study where I've locked the letters away. But each night, the footsteps return, wetter and heavier. Each morning, the trail leads to the study door, the wood of which is now warping from constant moisture, dark stains spreading across its surface like rot. Yesterday, I could have sworn I heard a voice beneath the sound of the footsteps, a gurgling, bubbling whisper that formed words no human throat could produce. It said my name, followed by the same phrase repeated over and over. The bargain remains. Tonight, I'm leaving this apartment forever. But as the sun begins to set and the shadows lengthen across the floor, I can already feel the air growing thick with humidity. And worse, as I pack my bags, I've realized something that turns my blood to ice. I can't seem to find those 7 letters anymore. Only empty envelopes remain, leaving me to wonder what has been released into this world, and why it knows my name. I never believed in hauntings until we moved into the Blackwood house. My wife Laura insisted it was perfect, spacious, affordable, with that vintage charm she'd always wanted. The realtor mentioned something about the previous owners leaving abruptly, but real estate agents always gloss over the flaws. 3 weeks after moving in, we decided to renovate the narrow hallway that connected our bedroom to the guest rooms. The built-in cabinet there was awkwardly positioned, making the already cramped corridor nearly impassable. The renovation was my project. I took a week off work, determined to tear out that eyesore myself. The wood was older than I'd expected, oak panels that had darkened with age. When I finally pried off the back panel, my flashlight beam revealed not the expected wall, but a small recess, a compartment roughly 3 feet deep that extended the length of the cabinet. My throat tightened as I shined the light around the space. Empty, except for dust and what looked like scratch marks on the inner walls. I called Laura over and we speculated about its purpose. A Prohibition-era hiding spot, perhaps, or storage that had been sealed up during previous renovations. We decided to incorporate it into our new design, adding a proper door for the additional storage space. That night was the first time we heard them. I just turned off the bedroom lights when a murmur drifted through the darkness. At first, I thought Laura was speaking to me, but she was lying still beside me. The whispers seemed to emanate from the direction of the hallway. Muffled, urgent voices, engaged in what sounded like an intense discussion. My skin prickled with goose flesh as I strained to make out words, but the language was indistinct, almost liquid in quality. When I flipped on the light, the voices ceased immediately. Laura hadn't heard them, or claimed she hadn't. I reluctantly chalked it up to the house settling or pipes groaning, though I knew better. The following night, the voices returned. This time, Laura heard them too. We lay rigid in our bed, scarcely breathing as we listened to the hushed, agitated conversation that seemed to be taking place just beyond our bedroom door. My heart hammered against my ribs as sweat beaded across my forehead. The whispers had a cadence, a rhythm that was almost, but not quite, human. When I finally gathered enough courage to investigate, I crept toward the door. The moment my hand touched the knob, the voices stopped. The hallway was empty, still. The newly exposed compartment, a black void in the wall. Days passed, and the pattern continued. Darkness brought the voices. Light silenced them. We started sleeping with the lights on, telling ourselves it was just our imagination, or perhaps some acoustical quirk of the old house. But the exhaustion from sleepless nights began to take its toll. Dark circles formed under Laura's eyes. My hands developed a persistent tremor. We snapped at each other over trivial matters. I became obsessed with that compartment. During daylight hours, I would sit inside it with a flashlight, running my fingers along the scratch marks, trying to decipher their pattern. Laura suggested calling someone, a contractor, an inspector, even a priest, but I refused. This was my house, my discovery, my problem to solve. One night, while Laura was visiting her sister, I decided to conduct an experiment. I positioned myself in the hallway with a voice recorder, turned off all the lights, and waited. The familiar whispers began almost immediately, closer than ever before. My mouth went dry as ice seemed to form along my spine. The voices surrounded me, their unintelligible debate growing increasingly heated. I fumbled for the recorder's button, desperate to capture proof of what was happening. Then something changed. One voice, deeper than the others, spoke directly to me. Not in words I could understand, but with unmistakable intent. It knew I was listening. My muscles locked in terror as the whispers converged, focusing their attention on my presence. The air grew dense, difficult to breathe, as if the darkness itself was pressing against my lungs. When I could bear it no longer, I lunged for the light switch. The sudden brightness burned my eyes, but the voices vanished. With trembling hands, I rewound the recorder and pressed play. There was nothing but static and the sound of my own ragged breathing. I didn't wait for Laura to return. That night, I sealed the compartment, nailing boards across the opening before replacing the cabinet's back panel. I worked until dawn, driven by a primal fear I couldn't articulate. The renovation remained unfinished. We've lived with the closed-up hallway for 3 months now. Laura thinks my obsession with the voices was stress-induced, a manifestation of anxiety about our new home and financial pressures. She suggested therapy, which I've reluctantly begun. The psychiatrist has prescribed medication for what she calls auditory hallucinations. Sometimes the pills help me sleep through the night, but sometimes I wake in the darkness to the sound of whispers, more insistent now, angrier. And lately, I've noticed something that sends icy needles of dread through my chest. Tiny splinters of wood on the hallway floor each morning, as if something is slowly, methodically working its way out. I haven't told Laura, but I think they're coming for me. After all, I heard what the deep voice said that night, the only words I've ever understood from their conversations. It spoke in perfect English, a cold whisper that replays in my nightmares. We know you're listening. The old farmhouse creaks with secrets. I've lived here alone long enough to know its ordinary sounds, the settling of century-old timber, the subtle shifting of foundation in the cold. But what began 3 weeks ago transcends any rational explanation. It started with Salem, my black cat, and his fixation on my bedroom wall. Now I lie awake each night, waiting for the clock to strike 3, wondering if tonight will be the night I finally see what he sees. I inherited this place after Margaret passed last spring. 47 years of marriage ended with a stroke that took her in her sleep. The doctors called it merciful. I call it abandonment. Only Salem has kept me company these past 11 months, a stray that wandered onto the property a few days after the funeral, as if sent by some cosmic force to ensure I didn't follow my wife too quickly into the grave. The first incident occurred on a Tuesday. I remember because I had spent the afternoon repairing fence posts along the north pasture, my aging muscles protesting every swing of the hammer. Sleep came quickly that night, deep and dreamless, until Salem's persistent meowing dragged me back to consciousness. The bedside clock glowed 3:00 a.m. in angry red digits. I found him sitting precisely centered before my bedroom door, back straight, tail curled neatly around his paws. His amber eyes fixed on something I couldn't see, and his cries held an urgency I'd never heard before. I stumbled out of bed, joints cracking in protest, and whispered for him to be quiet. The cold floorboards sent shivers up my legs as I approached him. He didn't acknowledge me. Instead, his eyes tracked something moving across the room. When I turned to follow his gaze, I saw nothing but shadows, yet the hairs on my arms stood upright, and my breath fogged the air, despite it being a mild October night. The following evening, I woke at exactly the same time to find Salem in the identical position. Only this time, I noticed my reading glasses had moved from the nightstand to the floor, though I distinctly remembered placing them in their case before sleeping. A coincidence, I told myself. Perhaps I'd knocked them off while dreaming. By the fifth night, there was no denying something was wrong. 3 a.m. arrived with Salem's punctual alertness, but now my bedroom door, which I had deliberately closed before sleeping, stood wide open. My heart pounded against my ribs as sweat beaded across my forehead despite the chill. I watched, paralyzed, as Salem's eyes tracked something invisible crossing my threshold, entering my room, approaching my bed. I tried convincing myself it was mind playing tricks. Dr. Reynolds had warned that grief sometimes manifests in unexpected ways. When I mentioned these occurrences during my checkup, he suggested increasing my antidepressants and recommended a grief counselor. He explained how isolation can amplify anxiety, how the mind fills empty spaces with fabrications. I nodded along, accepting his prescription while knowing medication wouldn't solve what was happening in my home. Last week, things escalated. I awoke not to Salem's meowing, but to the sensation of pressure at the foot of my bed, as if someone had sat down there. My breath caught in my throat. My muscles tensed as I feigned sleep, eyes barely open enough to see Salem positioned against the wall, his back arched, watching something move from my bed toward the corner of the room. The temperature plummeted so rapidly I could see my breath crystallizing in the moonlight. Something brushed against my face, gentle, almost affectionate, and I bit my tongue to keep from screaming. I've started documenting everything, the books rearranged on shelves, Margaret's collection of ceramic birds turned to face the wall, rather than outward as she always kept them. The smell of her perfume lingering in rooms she never entered when alive. My wedding ring, which I keep in a box in my dresser drawer, somehow appearing under my pillow. Yesterday, I installed a motion-activated camera facing the bedroom door. The first recording showed Salem taking his position at precisely 3:00 a.m. At 3:02, the door swung open, though the video showed nothing causing it to move. At 3:07, the dresser drawer opened and closed by itself. Most disturbing was watching Salem's eyes track something moving through the room that remained invisible to the camera. Tonight, I've decided to confront whatever visits my bedroom. I sit in the rocking chair in the corner, Salem curled tensely in my lap. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticks toward the appointed hour. My throat constricts. My heart thunders so loudly I fear it might mask any supernatural sounds. My hands tremble as they stroke Salem's fur, seeking comfort in his warm solidity. The clock strikes 3. Salem leaps from my lap and assumes his position. The temperature drops suddenly, my breath clouding before me. The door opens slowly, hinges crying out in the silence. Salem's eyes follow something I cannot see, something that moves toward my empty bed. Then I notice it, a nearly imperceptible distortion in the air, like heat rising from summer asphalt. It hovers over the side of the bed, where Margaret once slept. Salem meows, not in warning, but in recognition. The realization washes over me like ice water. The missing items, always returned. The perfume, the ring beneath my pillow, the gentle touch against my face. My voice breaks the silence, raspy with emotion. I whisper her name into the darkness. The response isn't audible. It's a feeling, a presence that enfolds me like familiar arms. Salem purrs loudly, rubbing against nothing visible by the bed. For the first time since her death, warmth spreads through my chest. I understand now. Salem doesn't fear what comes through the wall. He's been trying to tell me she never really left. The wall between our worlds is thinner than I imagined, and she's been reaching back, unable to fully let go, just as I've been unable to release her. As dawn approaches, the presence fades. Salem returns to me, purring contentedly as he settles in my lap. I'm no longer afraid of 3 o'clock. Instead, I find myself impatient for darkness to fall again, for the hour when the veil thins and Margaret returns to the home she's unwilling to abandon, and to the husband who still waits for her on this side of the wall.